Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the last day of I/O. Yeah. We're really excited to be here today because this is the first time UX writing has been on stage at I/O. So thank you so much. Awesome. Woohoo! Woo! I'm Maggie Stanfill, and I manage a team of UX writers at Google, and we work on travel, shopping, and payments products. And I'm joined here today by members of my team, Allison Rung and Juliana Appenrod. And today, you're probably here for the same reason we are. We're passionate about building products that people love. And we're here to share an insight with you that will keep users coming back again and again. It's choosing the right words. Because we all know what can happen when you choose the wrong words. Take, for example, the first time you use a social app. Can you imagine if it said, "No friends"? How sad? It'd be a pretty bad start to a new friendship. So what we're here to share with you today are insights to make sure you can apply content strategy to your product. So over the next 35 minutes, I'll share an overview of content strategy at Google. Allison will share 3 UX writing best practices, and Juliana will share a case study about how we defined brand voice for Android Pay. So let's get started with how we approach content strategy at Google. Many of you know we follow a principle: focus on the user and all else will follow. But what you might not realize is that for us, focusing on the user starts with the content. The content is the text, the reviews data, the imagery. This is content strategy, the holistic development and crafting of content in the product experience. And UX writing is a specialty within this discipline that focuses on helping users achieve their goals with language. And in my 5 years here at Google, I've had the great opportunity to work on a number of products, and I wanted to share a few scenarios with you so you can get an understanding of how we approach our craft. So for this example, say a user is searching for an Italian wine store in San Francisco, and they're looking for the closest one to them. The label, sort by distance, helps them find the right location. This has been the product of a ton of research and a lot of iterations to ensure we're surfacing the right information at the right time. Another example is when we're helping a user write a review on Google Maps. We offer information such as the fact that this will be posted publicly to engender trust, and we offer a helpful prompt: tell others why you like this place. So hopefully it's a quick way to get them started. Just curious, how many of you have written a review on Google Maps? Show of hands. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for contributing to the community. All right, and this time I'm going to take you into the kitchen for some hands-free help. And with using only their voice, a user can get directions for their recipe on Google Home. So what all 3 of these have in common is language. Language is helping the user get where they want to go. And by focusing on what the user wants to achieve, this builds trust and loyalty. This is what content strategy is all about. So at Google, I wanted to share a little bit about how we structure our team. We've made a big investment in content strategy as part of our user experience discipline. Content strategy is part of an overarching group that focuses on the user experience and focuses on building holistic product solutions, partnering with a cross-disciplinary team of writers, researchers, and designers. Writers work with designers to think about information hierarchy on the page and to guide user actions. Writers work with researchers to test hypotheses about language and inform our insights with their great research capabilities. We found that this holistic approach to solving these complex user and product problems really helps us create better user experiences. But what might not be quite as evident is the impact that this focus on language can have on the business. So I want to share with you an example from hotel search on Google. This is a great example where literally changing 2 words had a significant impact on the business. We used to have a label which read book a room, and what we found was this was far too committal at that stage in the decision-making process. So we switched it to check availability, and what we found was this was meeting the user where they were at in their mindset. They were still considering rooms, and they wanted to understand what dates were available, what prices were in that date range. And so with those 2 words, check availability, we saw a 17% increase in engagement. That's a significant impact on the business. Sometimes the other end of the spectrum is harder to measure, but equally important. That emotional connection that users have with a product. Sometimes we call this emotional connection brand voice. And I want to share a little bit about how you might approach defining brand voice for your app or product. So first, start with the benefits. Really consider how to enunciate the most standout traits of your product, and then consider how your product's differentiated from its competitors. When I had the opportunity to work on the Google brand voice, we took our lead from the Google search page. Its simplicity and ease of use was a cue for us to inform our brand voice tenet around usefulness. We also took our lead from the delightful Google Doodle, and we have a tenet which is around optimism, and you'll hear more of this throughout the day. So basically, we have this brand foundation with our brand voice, and it applies to our suite of products. And I'll share with you a recent example that I had the opportunity to work on with my team, which is the Google Trips app. And if you guys haven't checked it out, I highly recommend that you do. It's a fun app in that it helps you organize all of your travel information so it's available offline. So you can download reservations, and if you arrive somewhere without data, you can still access it. So when we were thinking about the benefit, we landed on a line which reads, no internet, no problem. Paired with a delightful illustration, we think this really tells the story of both the benefits and the excitement of travel. So through our experience here at Google, we found that when you have the foundation of UX writing and you add brand voice, when those sum of the parts come together, something really amazing can happen. We believe that UX writing can certainly survive with the fundamentals, but it can thrive with brand voice. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Allison, who will talk about our 3 UX writing best practices.
Thanks, Maggie. My name's Allison Rung, and I'm a writer on the Trust and Privacy team. Part of my job is to explain why you see ads on Google and to show how you can control those ads to make them better for you. Like any other writer at Google, I learn a lot of technical language before translating it into something that anybody can understand. The technical language that I start with tends to do with advertising and ad networks, but this challenge is common for any product writing. How do you translate what's happening on your back end to the other side of the screen? How do you make your software sound human? This work is pretty intuitive for writers. We think about the technical context we learned about, and then we think about the person who's using the app or the product, and then we decide what sounds right. We tend to say what we're writing out loud to make sure that each word has the right ring to it. But I know many of you don't have writers on your product teams yet. So today I'm going to try to reverse engineer this natural writing process and guide you through 3 of the principles that guide it. These are principles that we've kind of internalized. And they are clear, concise, and useful. I'll start with clear. So let's say that somebody's trying to sign into your app, and then they mess up their password for whatever reason. And then they see this. Error, failure, an authentication error has occurred. This sounds terrible, right? Right. It reminds me of those restart messages we got on our first computers in like the late 80s, early 90s. Remember those? There was a bomb that was about to explode. It said something about system error. What was going on there and what's happening here is a disaster in software terms because the function can't be completed. But for people, it's not a big deal, and we can tone down this language a little. So in other words, failure and authentication are software problems, not human problems. And we can improve them by switching them out to something that people can relate to, like signing in. Sign-in error. A sign-in error has occurred. This is better. And notice here how a single term, sign-in, has replaced two different technical terms, failure and authentication. So that should tell you that clear doesn't mean precise. It means just enough context to make sense to your typical user. And I know a lot of you work on enterprise apps or you're writing for specialists. Specialist language is totally okay when you have a specialist audience. You just have to keep your own audience in mind. All right. So another way you can make your writing clearer is to pay attention to verbs. A verb is an action word. It tends to be the most powerful part of your sentence. And ideally, it will relate some action to the user. Here, our verb is has occurred. And it's a weak verb because it's describing a state of being within the software. So to make it better, we'll just switch it for what the user's doing, the user's action. You entered an incorrect password. Pretty simple, right? OK, so this is clarity. With clarity, we remove technical terms, and we put the action in the context of the user. This is an especially good lesson to remember when you're writing your product announcements or your app updates. Instead of focusing on the technical specs of whatever new feature you're releasing, try to focus on the new action that people can perform. Our second principle is concise. Concise doesn't only mean short. It means something closer to economical. So when we're writing with concision, we look at our message and we make sure that every word on the screen has a distinct job. Here, the header doesn't have a distinct job. We don't need it. The body's working fine without it. And this is a very common problem in product writing. We have a ton of superfluous headers, or subtexts, or sidebars, or descriptions, because your design shows some pre-existing text field, and then you feel compelled to fill it in. But you should really avoid that when you can, and instead practice content-first design. Content-first design will make sure that your visuals are working in service of what you're trying to say, and not the other way around. So try not to jam your messages into boxes that weren't meant for them. And ideally, try to have designers work in parallel with writers. OK, so now we've gotten rid of our header. And I've been adamant about removing extra text here, because as you all know from experience, we don't read every word on screens, do we? We scan. So this is a mocked-up heat map from an eye tracking study showing where people's focal points land. We know that people's eyes follow an F-shaped pattern as they read screens. They read the first line, maybe the second line, but then they start skipping down the page, catching only the first or second word of each sentence. So for this reason, we keep our text not only concise, but also front-loaded. Front-loading means to put your important concepts first, so people's eyes catch those important words as they skip down. Here, we're in trouble, because the most important concept, the incorrect password, is all the way at the end. And we can fix it by flipping this around. Wrong password. So now that we've done this, it turns out we don't need anything else, right? This is fine. These 2 words are working on their own. You won't always be able to reduce your text to just 2 words, but this principle will always hold true, and you can use it anywhere where you're writing for screens. Keep the most important text up front, and then ruthlessly edit whatever comes after it. All right, now we're on to our final principle, useful. You want your text to help people to get where they want to go. And now we'll talk about the only part of the message we haven't looked at yet, the call to action, or CTA. Calls to action, they tend to be button text or they're hyperlinked, and they guide people to their next step. So for that reason, they need to resonate with what they want to do. Here, OK is not a good CTA, because people aren't generally happy or OK with the wrong password. No, they want to try again, right? So try again is a perfectly good edit. But if everyone here, if you think for a minute about all the hundreds or thousands of times you've messed up your password, I know for me it's usually on airline websites, you'll realize this isn't all we need, right? Right, good. Yeah, it's early here in California, but I see people nodding. Yeah, we need to offer password recovery too. If you forget your password and your only option is to try again, you'll only be annoyed. OK, so I know you guys are all pros, and I know that you have this basic sign-in behavior covered. It's a very common pattern. But what I want you to take away is that paying attention to writing and the people you're writing for can uncover some of the basic functions your app needs to offer. So if you don't think of those edge cases and write to them, then you might see some drop-off in your usage. OK, wrapping up. Clear, concise, and useful. If you pay attention to these 3 principles, you'll connect better with your users. But you may have realized, as I walked you through this editing exercise, that good UX writing is not a science. There's no correct answer. These 3 principles aren't in perfect harmony. There's a kind of tension in between them. They're competing with each other. When we made our text clear, it was still pretty long, right? It wasn't very scannable. Then when we made the text concise, it got shorter, but that was at the expense of some clarity. And then finally, when we made the text useful, it stretched out, it got longer again, it became less scannable. So you can find the right balance between these principles. When you think about your user's context, think about what she wants to do in the moment. And you can also look toward your product's brand voice. Your brand voice should guide you to the right balance between clear, concise, and useful in a way that's true to your product's character. And you can begin to find the elements of that character by thinking about the core function of what your product does, and then think about what makes it special, how it's differentiated. As Maggie mentioned, Google's brand voice is designed in part after our search page. Search is an everyday tool, so we like to use everyday, friendly language. And search is also pretty clever, so we use clever language sometimes, but we're not too clever because we want to be accessible to anyone. Our language also reflects the optimism of search that you can see here in the I'm feeling lucky button, or those doodle illustrations that Maggie mentioned. I like to talk through Google's brand voice with this old slogan from Google Earth. Hello, Earth. This is so simple, right? This is positive and forward-looking, and it's inclusive to the point of welcoming the entire globe. There's also a slight play on words here, where Earth refers both to the product name and the planet. And we all know this Android slogan. This sounds googly, right? Be together, not the same. Many of us love this, but why do we love it? Why does it sound so googly? How is it working? Well, first of all, there's this overarching theme of inclusion that we saw in the Hello Earth slogan. And there's also a play on words here, which reflects the optimism of our brand. Be together, not the same. As we read this, there's kind of cognitive surprise. We read, be together, not. And we expect something like the opposite of together, apart. Be together, not apart, right? But Google replaces apart with the same. So now we get across the concept of difference and even celebrate it without any negativity. Be together, not the same. So again, we're a very positive brand. Coming back to this drab password message, wrong password. This is great UX writing. It's clear, it's concise, it's useful. It would work for any product. But if this came across the desk of any of my writing colleagues, I think they would update it to be more on brand. And they'd probably change it to something like, that password doesn't look right. And they would do that because since optimism is so important to our brand, we don't like to lead with negative words like wrong. We're also okay with making the text a little longer, a little less concise, in order to be friendly and chatty. That password doesn't look right. So now this sounds like Google, and it's right for Google. But that doesn't mean it's right for your brand. So it's up to you to figure out what the right sound is for your own brand voice. So to help you with that, you'll hear from Juliana, who will talk about building brand voice for a new product.
Thanks, Allison. Hi, I'm Juliana Appenrod, and I'm a UX writer on the payments team. One of the apps I work on is Android Pay. Some of you might be familiar with it. You can use it to pay with your Android phone in stores and in apps. A few months after we launched Android Pay, a team at Google conducted some research around the app's brand strategy. And what they found was that the brand characteristics we were initially emphasizing, things like simplicity and security, were things that people just expected of a payment method. They weren't differentiators. This pushed our team to think a little bit more about what the Android Pay brand should look like. And for me, when thinking about what words should go in the user interface, this meant going beyond the basic UX writing principles. If we really wanted to connect with our target users and get more than just the most tech-savvy to adopt this new way of paying, we needed to give Android Pay a unique brand voice. Now, Maggie and Allison both talked a little bit about the Google brand voice. And since Android Pay is a Google product, we definitely wanted to stay true to that voice. But there are many Google products, and each one serves a different purpose in people's lives, which means that each product's voice can and should sound a little different. Android Pay is also distinct from some of the other more established Google products because mobile payment apps are still seen as a thing of the future, especially here in the US. And research showed that we had an opportunity to appeal to the more emotional dimensions of the Android Pay experience, like the excitement people feel the first time they successfully pay with their phone. These are the moments where we can give Android Pay a recognizable personality. Here's one example of how we've done that visually. The Android bot, which is part of the app logo, comes to life on the payment confirmation screen to celebrate different holidays and events. As you can see, he dressed up as Darth Vader just a couple weeks ago for May the 4th. It takes a combination of visuals like this and words both working together to bring your product's brand voice to life. Right now, I'm just going to focus on the writing side of things and walk you through how we've started to develop the Android Pay voice and how we bring that to life through our UX writing. The hope is that this will give you all a sense of how you can start to do the same for your products. So it's best to start with a set of brand principles. These can be just 3 or 4 adjectives that you feel embody your brand and represent how you want people to perceive it. A fun brainstorming exercise you can do to help you come up with these principles is to imagine you're signing your product up for a dating site. What words or info would you put in your product's dating profile? What is it about your product that you think would stand out or be most interesting to people? What will make them swipe right and want to learn more? You can then distill these qualities into descriptive words, which will become your brand principles. We did this exercise with our team, including designers, researchers, engineers, product managers, and marketers, and we all got together and we did some brainstorming, and based on that, as well as the research that was done, we ultimately defined the Android Pay brand as fresh, empathetic, and approachable. Once you have your brand principles, the next step is to think about what these principles will sound like when you apply them to your writing. And these will become your writing guidelines. For example, to sound fresh, we decided we need to write in a way that's snappy and exciting. This principle comes into play a lot when we're trying to really grab a user's attention and really hook them. And sometimes this can be before they've even started using our app. When someone types Android Pay into Google search, one of the top results takes them to our marketing website, where they'll see a series of imagery and headlines like this. Here, we have a chance to really pull people in and get them to think, I need to try this app. And that's where the snappy language comes in. Headlines like Tap Pay Splash and Tap Pay Tasty not only highlight the tap and pay functionality behind Android Pay, but also the fun things you can buy with it. They show that how you pay can be equally as exciting as what you're paying for. Empathetic. We know that changing the way you do an everyday thing like paying can feel uncomfortable and maybe even a little scary. So to counteract that, we try to write in a way that's helpful and reassuring. Often, this means anticipating the questions or concerns a user might have and proactively providing them with answers. On this screen, we do just that. First, by saying, enjoy quick setup with this card, we're reassuring the user that they won't have to go through that dreaded process of typing in a credit card number on their phone. Then we explain that we've pulled in this card from their Google account. And that way, they're not left wondering where in the world we got this information. Through our language, we want to show users that we're doing everything we can to help make their lives easier. Approachable. This one means we want everyone to feel like they can use Android Pay, that it isn't just for the most tech-savvy. To convey that feeling in our app, we write in a way that's friendly and conversational. This means eliminating the jargon and the formalities and simply talking to users in the same casual, easy-to-understand way we talk to our friends. When we're explaining to users how Android Pay works, for example, we don't talk about NFC or HCE technology because the average user would likely have no idea what that means. Instead, we talk in terms everyone can understand. Unlock your phone and hold it to the terminal at checkout. We don't need to get into what's going on behind the scenes. That should give you an idea of how brand principles can be applied to writing. And once you have your own brand principles and writing guidelines in place, you should start to have a pretty good sense of what your product's voice will sound like. Then you can take it a step further and think about what your voice will sound like in different contexts. This is often referred to as tone. An easy way to remember the difference between voice and tone is to think about it like a person. A person's voice always stays the same, right? but the tone they talk to you in may change, depending on the situation or what they're saying. In an app, this might mean talking to users in a different way during a celebratory moment, like when they've just won a prize, versus when their network connection goes out and they're seeing an error message. For Android Pay, we mapped these different moments in the user journey on a tone spectrum, ranging from serious to whimsical. This helps us make sure that we're using our voice in a consistent way across the entire user experience. For your product, the two ends of this spectrum might be labeled differently. Your tone might range from informative to inspiring or direct to humorous. These are just a couple examples, and you'll be able to tell what works best for your brand. It can also vary a lot depending on what type of product you're building and who the audience is. Once you have the two ends of your y-axis labeled, you then need to determine what moments in the user journey you're going to map. A good way to do this is to think about the distinct milestones or interactions in your user experience. These can be things like onboarding, education, or troubleshooting. To help you decide where these will fall on the spectrum, you can then think about what the user's goal is, what they might be feeling in that moment, as well as what you'd like them to feel. To give you an example, I'll show you where we mapped a few of the Android Pay user touchpoints. The first impression. When we're making a first impression on the user, we aim for a very whimsical tone because we're trying to get people excited about Android Pay. This could be when they're seeing an ad, opening the app for the first time, or, as I showed you earlier, landing on our marketing site, where they'll be greeted with a whimsical headline and a rainbow sprinkled donut to go with it. When the user is setting up the app or using it to pay, our tone still falls on the whimsical end of the spectrum, but to a lesser degree. That's because in these moments, the user's trying to get something done, so we don't want our personality to get in the way. Error messages fall on the more serious end of the spectrum. When a user sees an error, they might be frustrated, so this isn't the right time for too much personality or humor. Needless to say, we're not going to tell the user that something's up with their card or to holler at their bank if they're having an issue adding their credit card to the app. Instead, we want to be straightforward about the issue and tell them how to fix it. So we'd say your card couldn't be added, and contact your bank. All right. You've established your voice, and you've mapped your tone. Now it's time to apply both of these and do some UX writing. It's time to decide what words will go in your user interface. And that ends up being a combination of everything we've told you today. To be successful, UI text needs to be clear, concise, and useful, as well as reflect your brand voice. To show you how you can get there, I'll quickly walk you through what our writing process might look like. Let's say we're trying to decide what to say to the user the first time they open Android Pay. We can guess that they're curious, so we probably want to tell them what they can do with the app, as well as give them reason to move beyond this screen and set it up. At the beginning of our writing process, we might start with something long and descriptive, like this: pay with your phone in stores and enjoy quick checkout in apps. Then we think about the 3 principles of good UX writing. This text does feel clear and useful, but it isn't concise. So we think about what pieces of info are essential and which ones could be communicated through visuals instead. And we might edit it to something like this: a faster way to pay. With this new version, we've checked off clear, concise, and useful. So we have just one step left: we need to think about voice and tone. We'd ask ourselves, does this text clearly convey our brand? Not really. It feels pretty generic. So going back to our brand principles, we think about how we can make it feel fresher and more exciting. Maybe even whimsical, since this might be our first impression on the user. And in our final iteration, we might end up with something like this. Everything you need to speed through checkout. It's a little longer than the previous version, but that can happen when you add personality to UI text. And it's up to you whether infusing that personality is worth the extra words. And it isn't always a clear decision. If you're not sure whether more words will be more effective or whether a certain word will be more effective than another, A/B test it. From experience, we can say that when you're trying to find the right words for your product, you should never underestimate the power of A/B testing. Through an A/B test we ran on the start screen in Android Pay, we discovered that changing the button text from Add Card to Get Started resulted in a 12% increase in click-throughs. Pretty amazing. A/B testing is a great way to validate a hypothesis you might have, or to decide between two different versions of text if you're just not sure which one will connect more with your users. Now I'll hand it back to Maggie to wrap things up and to share a handy checklist you can start applying to your own UX writing.
Thank you. Thank you, Juliana. So we've heard from Allison about the best practices in UX writing. We heard about brand voice just now, and I wanted to reflect on our first sad screen. I think we can do better, right? All right, let's apply what we learned and do a quick on-brand edit. So a simple way to make this much more positive and much more useful is ready to add some friends, import your contacts. So adding that simple call to action, import your contacts, could help the user get started and ultimately have a better relationship with this app. All right, so we hope what we shared with you today will be a helpful reference as you get back to work after this great few days at I/O and consider how you might apply some of these best practices to your product. So a quick run through. We recommend that you always think about the user first, focus on the user, and all else will follow is a mantra we love to think about here. Be clear. Write in language that's free of jargon and with sufficient context. Be concise. Write in a style that's economical and scannable. Remember the F-shaped pattern that Allison described. Be useful. Write in a way that guides the action. And if you don't have a call to action, you might want to add one. And be on brand. Define your brand voice and flex your tone accordingly, as Juliana described. Finally, whenever possible, be data-driven. If you can apply A/B testing or other user testing, it's a great way to test your knowledge of your language and how well it's resonating with the user. In sum, I want to first and foremost thank these two amazing contributors. We'll be up front. If you guys have questions, please come up and ask them. We hope that what we shared with you today will help you make your product stand out with language. Thank you so much.